Okay, so completing the square, we actually just came off of doing this process. Okay, so let me just going back to last unit here. What was it all about again? Okay, so this is something we did last unit. It only can occur if there is a simple trinomial. So this is simple because it has a 1x squared. How did we get that blank spot? We had to do something and something. Something and something to get that number at the end. Half squared. Do you remember that? Okay, so take this. Half of it. Got that in your head? Square that. And you should get a 25. Half was -5 squared. Then I can now write this as a perfect square. So what squares to get me that? Obviously an x there to FOIL with an x squared. And then how do you get this? -5. Because when you FOIL it, it would double to that and it would square to that. Okay, remember that process? Okay, so let's try some. Okay, so step 1 is move this to the other side. Okay, why do I want to move it to the other side? The reason would be I want to end with a specific number, right? I want my blank there. So what would I like to end this with instead now? So half squared. Take that number, half squared. You should get a, did you get a +4? What do you think I do next? This is all very similar. Teeter-totters. We didn't have that existing before. We put it on there, so we should bounce it back out. Okay, same maneuvers as last time. The only thing different from the last time right now is that we don't have a y, because y is specifically 0 now. Okay, so now I need you to write this as a square. What squares to get me that trinomial? So x + 2, and then this side is 17. Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit different than what we did last unit. So last unit we would have been finalized because we would have had y + 17, but now that y is 0, we can actually isolate x. So we're going to isolate x. So what's the first algebraic maneuver I'm going to do to start working to get x alone? I'm going to square root both sides. What happens there is that the square root and the square just cancel each other. So I get x + 2. Then the square root of 17 is not a nice number. So I'm going to write the square root of 17, but positive or negative, because we could have had both. X equals plus minus the square root of 17 minus 2. That's my last algebra move to get x alone. And I'm going to leave it like that. Okay, I want you to leave those answers like that, but we are going to practice getting this into a decimal, because what does this mean? If I went to graph this, could you graph that? No. Okay, so I want you to go into your calculator and give me a square root 17 minus 2. square root of 17 minus 2. See if you get, I got 2.12. See if you match that. And then I want you to give me a negative square root of 17 minus 2. Does everybody know that you can't type in the square root of negative 17? That's not what I'm doing. Okay, I want the square root on the outside. Can you practice that type? Because I do ask you a question on the test about this. What is this as a decimal? What does this mean on a graph? What does this mean on a graph now? It means my parabola will hit at 2.12. It'll hit at 2.12 and negative 6.12. That's what that means. So connections to everything. Okay, now we are actually also going to check our answer with another method to show you that these all work. What's the method that we learned yesterday? Do you remember the name of it? The formula method? Okay, so the formula method. Let's try that and see what we can do. So negative b will go negative 4 in that spot. Plus minus the square root of, so b squared. So b squared should get to be 16. Minus 4 bracket 1 bracket negative 13. All over 2 times 1. Okay, I should go to my calculator and figure out that discriminant part, which is just the square root number. Okay, now we are going to type that in. So I want you to type that in. We're going to go negative 4 plus root 68 in brackets, divide by 2. Tell me, would these answers match the decimals that we got before? That's what we're trying to see. Checking that, did it match? Look at that. Mine matched. So look at that. We can do this problem in multiple ways. Okay? So when you are working to solve problems, the formula is the go-to. Okay? I would never use completing this square to solve a problem, ever. The only time you would do it is the question says complete the square. So there will be one spot on your test where you're going to have to do it. Other than that, I would never pick that. The formula is a lot more simplified. Okay? Okay, so let's try this again. Complete the square. A little bit faster here. First step, we're going to move the number. Second step, I'm going to end the trinomial how I want. So what do I want to put at the end of my trinomial? Half squared. So I want to put a 25 there, which upsets my teeter-totter, so we're going to balance it back out. Then I'm going to say what is the perfect square for that trinomial. So x minus 5 is the perfect square, equals 32. Okay, working to get x alone, I'm going to be square rooting both sides, which just leaves a nice x minus 5, plus minus the square root of 32, which doesn't work nicely, so we're just going to leave it as a root. And then to get x alone, I would have to add 5, and then I'm done. And that's how I'm expecting you to answer the question like that. Okay? I would like this on your test. I do a second step where I say, can you just give me that as a decimal as well? But this is how I want your answer, and then you can go further after. Okay, so now we're going to amp this up a notch, and we're going to be working with not a simple trinomial. Okay, so a difference here from last unit, I needed to keep the slope number, which is 4. I needed to keep it in the equation. On the solving, I don't need to keep it because I'm trying to isolate x here. I'm not trying to work with my equation. So step 1 is this. I'm going to take everything divided by 4 so that I can get myself into a simple trinomial. So there's step 1, and then the rest is the same. So we're going to get that out of there. And then your process means, what do I want to end this with? What do you want at the end of your trinomial? So that's why you had that out, because you want to end it with a specific number. So half squared is a 4. So I'm going to teeter-totter it with a 4. What is the perfect square that will get you that? So you remember, it'll have to double and square, right? That's always the relationship. And on your test, I'm going to ask you that you give me a fraction and not decimal. So there should be no calculator here. Okay, we can do this without a calculator. Okay, so how do you add fractions again? So right now, I'm just going to put that over 1, just so I remember. So how do you add fractions? What's the big rule? Common denominator. So this has a 4 on the bottom. So I would like to change this bottom to be a 4, which means the top would have to change to a 16. So when I add that together, 15 plus 16 is 31 over 4. Look at that. You could do fractions and you didn't even have to touch a calculator. Okay, so now you would get x alone. So the first maneuver is square root to get that out. Plus minus the square root of that fraction, which needs to all be in. here's what I would like at the end. So you can see how my fraction is entirely in that square root. Okay, this is for the people that understand a little bit more sophisticated stuff. You're going to see this quite a bit in grade 12. I could also write that as the square root of 31 over 2, because the square root of 4 is 2, but now I don't have it under a radical. So if that confused you, don't worry about it. If you get it, that's great, because then you're kind of thinking ahead. Okay, last one, and then you're off. Okay, so when we do completing the square, we really like those simple trinomials. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a simple trinomial. And then I'm going to leave that as a fraction again, because that's not a nice whole number. Okay, so we're going to move, because I want a spot to end it. So I want to end it on my own number. So what number would you have to pick to put at the end? So half squared is always the process. Half squared is a 9. What perfect square is the same as that trinomial? So these things you should be all doing by yourself now. X plus 3, right? Doubles squares. Okay, adding fractions again. We need the same bottom. So this I'm going to change to a 3 on the bottom to match that 3, which means 9 would turn into a 27. So what is negative 17 plus 27, or aka 27 minus 17? Should get 10. Positive 27 minus 17 makes 10. Okay, isolation time, so we're going to square root. And then the last step is to get x all alone. Okay. On your test, if you have lots of time, you can turn that to a decimal, and then you can do a quadratic formula on your numbers and check that your numbers are all matching. If you have lots of time, that always works.